My parents used to say I was their bad luck. When I left, I took that so-called luck with me. I grew up hearing that I was the reason everything in my family went wrong. My parents had my older brother first, and he fit every expectation. He earned good grades, behaved well, and did well in sports. 3 years later, I was born, and according to them, that's when everything started falling apart. My father lost his job 6 months after I was born. My mother was in a car accident when I was 2. My grandmother passed away when I was 4. The family dog ran away when I was 5. Every negative event became my responsibility, as if I carried some invisible curse. At first, my mother said it jokingly. She laughed and called me her little storm cloud. Over time, the humor disappeared. By the time I was 10, my parents openly blamed me for their struggles. If the electric bill was higher than expected, it was because I used too much power. If something broke, it was blamed on my bad energy. If my father missed a promotion, it was because he was burdened with raising an unlucky child. My brother followed their lead and started calling me Jinx. The nickname stayed with me through middle school and high school. For years, I believed them. I thought I really was cursed. I apologized constantly for things I hadn't caused. I tried to stay quiet and unnoticed so my bad luck wouldn't spread. I focused on school, hoping good grades would prove I wasn't a burden. At 16, I got a job and paid for my own clothes and school supplies so they couldn't accuse me of wasting their money. None of it changed how they treated me. When I was 17, my brother was accepted into a good college. My parents threw him a large party and proudly told everyone how successful he would be. A year later, I was accepted to the same college with a better scholarship. My mother said it probably wouldn't last because things always went wrong for me. My father suggested community college instead, saying it would save them embarrassment when I failed. I went anyway. I left home at 18 with 2 suitcases and a bank account I had quietly built over the years. My parents didn't help me move. My brother didn't say goodbye. My mother told me to call when I needed to come back, confident that I would. I never did. College was difficult, but not because of bad luck. It was hard because I had to unlearn everything my parents taught me about myself. I made real friends for the first time, people who didn't treat me like a problem. I joined clubs and studied subjects I genuinely cared about. When I failed a test once, my roommate told me it was okay and suggested we study harder next time. She didn't blame me for anything. She helped me improve. I graduated with honors. I found a job at an architecture firm 4 hours from my hometown. Over 5 years, I worked my way up to project manager. I bought a small condo with my own savings. I adopted a cat who didn't run away. I dated someone who genuinely enjoyed my company. Everything my parents said would fall apart stayed intact because I built it myself, without their voices in my head. Back home, things declined. My father's drinking worsened and he lost another job. My mother's health suffered because she avoided doctors until emergencies forced her to go. My brother dropped out of college after 2 years and moved back home. He struggled to keep a job and spent most of his time playing video games in his childhood bedroom. The child they praised never became what they expected, but they never questioned their beliefs. They kept waiting for me to fail. Once a year, on my birthday, my mother would call and ask how I was doing, always sounding like she expected bad news. When I mentioned promotions, she warned me not to get comfortable. When I bought my condo, she asked how much debt I was in. When I said I was happy, she laughed and said it wouldn't last. Eventually, I stopped sharing my life. Then I stopped calling back. 3 years ago, my brother needed surgery and my parents couldn't afford it. My father called for the first time in years. He didn't ask how I was. He simply said they needed money and that I should help since I apparently had plenty now. After the call ended, I stared at my phone for 20 minutes, my hands shaking. $15,000 echoed in my mind. After years of silence, this was the reason they reached out, not to apologize, but to demand payment. That familiar pressure returned, the same feeling I had growing up of being blamed just for existing. I set my phone down and watched it, half expecting it to ring again. The room grew dark as the sun set, and I didn't turn on the lights. My cat jumped onto the couch beside me, and I focused on the simple comfort of petting her instead of the anger rising in my chest. Celian came home around 6:30 and immediately sensed something was wrong. I told him about the call in a flat, detached way, as if I were reading a list instead of explaining how my father demanded money after years of blame. Celian listened carefully, his concern shifting into quiet anger. When he asked if I was okay, I realized I didn't know. I felt angry, guilty, sad, and exhausted all at once. When I said that, he nodded and said it made sense. Later, I called my therapist, Melina, and left a message asking for an urgent appointment. Old thoughts were resurfacing, and I could hear my mother's voice telling me I was selfish and ungrateful. I hated that those thoughts still affected me. Celian supported the decision, reminding me it was the right step. That night, I barely slept. Memories kept replaying, my father losing jobs, my mother blaming stress on me, the car accident, my grandmother's illness. Each memory reopened wounds I thought had healed. I cried quietly in the dark. The next morning, Melina's office called back with a cancellation. I took the day off work and spent hours pacing, cleaning, reorganizing, and starting shows I couldn't focus on. When I arrived early for my appointment, I felt like I'd gone backward, like I was the anxious person I used to be, instead of the adult I thought I had become. In therapy, I explained everything. Melina listened and then asked what I wanted, not what I felt obligated to do. I admitted I'd researched my brother's condition and knew the surgery was necessary. But I also recognized the pattern. My parents had supported him completely while pushing me to be independent as a teenager. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. We discussed the difference between genuine help and reinforcing harmful patterns. Melina pointed out that giving money without limits would reinforce their belief that I existed to fix their problems. That perspective changed how I saw the situation. I left therapy with the task of defining my boundaries. That evening, Celian helped me talk through realistic options. We agreed that helping my brother access resources directly felt more appropriate than handing over money. Over the weekend, I drafted an email to my father. After several revisions, I wrote that I wanted to help my brother find financial assistance and payment options, but wasn't comfortable giving money directly. I kept the message clear and respectful. After rereading it, I sent it. On Monday, my mother called. She immediately accused me of being ungrateful and disloyal. She dismissed my offer of help and demanded money instead. She revisited every supposed failure from my childhood, twisting normal experiences into proof that I was a disappointment. Then she blamed my brother for draining their resources simply by existing. Something finally broke. I told her I was done being blamed and that I would help my brother responsibly, but I would not enable their behavior. She ended the call abruptly. Afterward, I locked myself in the bathroom, trying to calm down. I felt shaken, but also proud. I had finally spoken up. That evening, Celian held me while I cried, reminding me that setting boundaries doesn't make me a bad person. I knew he was right, even though it still hurt. A part of me kept hoping they might surprise me and actually listen to what I was saying. Instead, they confirmed exactly who they've always been. I spend the next day drafting an email to Curtis. I find his old address in my contacts from years ago and stare at the blank message for 20 minutes, unsure how to start. I delete 3 different drafts before settling on something short and practical. I write that I want to help him directly by researching hospital payment plans and financial assistance programs. I list a few specific resources I found online and offer to help him apply. I don't mention our parents, the phone call, or any family conflict. I keep it focused on the problem itself, not the emotions surrounding it. My finger hovers over the send button for another 5 minutes before I finally click it. The email disappears, and I immediately wonder if the address still works or if it will bounce back. For the next 3 days, I check my email constantly. Every notification makes my stomach tense, even when it's just work updates or spam. I keep my phone close and wake up during the night to see if he replied. Salyan notices me checking my phone at dinner and asks if I'm waiting for something important. I tell him about the email, and he squeezes my hand without saying a word. On the 3rd day, Curtis responds. His message is brief. He thanks me for offering, but says our parents already found another solution. He doesn't explain what that solution is or where the money came from. I read the email several times, searching for hidden meaning, but it's straightforward. I feel a mix of relief that I don't have to be more involved and guilt that maybe I should have just given them the money. I hate that I'm still questioning myself for people who never questioned how they treated me. At my therapy session with Milena 2 days later, I bring up the phone call right away. She listens as I go over the conversation, including the part where my mother listed my childhood mistakes like evidence. Milena asks me to notice how I reacted at different moments. I realize I grew quieter as the call went on. I slipped back into my old habit of accepting whatever was said and making myself smaller. I apologized for things that weren't my fault, just like I did when I was 10. Milena points out that I also broke the pattern by speaking up at the end. She reminds me that regressing at first doesn't cancel out setting a boundary later. I tell her it doesn't feel like enough because I still let my mother speak to me that way for most of the call. Milena says changing long-term patterns takes time and I don't need to get it right immediately. When she asks what I learned, I say I learned my mother will never see me differently, no matter what I achieve. Milena nods and says that's important information because it means I can stop trying to prove myself to someone who refuses to see the evidence. I spend the rest of the week checking my phone even though Curtis already replied. I keep expecting another call filled with demands or anger, but nothing happens. The silence feels worse than another argument because it confirmed what I already knew. They wanted money, not a relationship. If they cared about me as a person, they would have followed up. Instead, they heard no and disappeared again. I talk about this in my next session, and Milena asks how it makes me feel. I tell her it makes me sad, but also strangely free, because I no longer have to wonder if they might change. Work becomes a place where I can stop thinking about my family. I throw myself into a new project designing a community center and spend long hours focused on details. I stay late several nights and come in early twice. Yoam stops by my office on Friday and notes the extra hours. He asks if everything is okay and suggests I take a day off next week. I realize I've been using work to avoid my emotions. I thank him and agree to take Monday off, even though the idea of an unstructured day makes me uncomfortable. That afternoon, Alyssa asks if I want to get lunch. We go to a nearby cafe and order salads we barely eat. I tell her everything, being the family scapegoat, my brother's surgery, my father's call, and the argument with my mother. I explain how I stood up for myself, but still feel guilty. Alyssa listens quietly. When I finish, she tells me she's been no contact with her father for 6 years. She says the guilt never fully disappears, but it does get easier. Cutting him off was the healthiest decision she ever made. Hearing someone I respect talk openly about similar issues makes me feel less alone.
She tells me that choosing yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is harming yourself for others. It's something I've heard before, but coming from her, it feels real. She's successful and grounded, and she made the same choice I'm making. That helps me believe I'm not wrong for protecting myself. That night, I pull out an old college journal my therapist once asked me to keep. I haven't touched it in years, but I start writing again. I outline the pattern of blame from my childhood to now, listing specific events. Every problem was blamed on someone else. First me, later Curtis. My parents never took responsibility for their drinking, health neglect, or financial decisions. Seeing it written out helps me recognize it as a system, not isolated moments. It was never about me being unlucky. It was about them needing someone to blame.
Cillian suggests a short weekend trip, and he books a small cottage by the coast. We leave Friday after work, and I feel some tension fade as we drive farther away. Saturday morning, I walk along the beach alone. The weather is cold and gray, but the distance feels necessary. Being 4 hours away from my hometown isn't always enough. Sometimes I need space where they can't reach me. Walking there, I realize something simple but important. Their story about me being bad luck was never about me. I was a baby when my father lost his job. I didn't cause any of those events. Blaming me was easier than facing their own choices. The realization doesn't remove the pain, but it gives it context. Back home, I call Hi, a friend I haven't spoken to in months. We catch up, then I tell her everything about the money request and my confusion over what I owe my family. She listens and reminds me how much I used to apologize for existing. She tells me she's proud of how far I've come. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. Before we hang up, she tells me she's getting engaged and asks me to be in her wedding. I say yes immediately. The happiness I feel has nothing to do with my parents. This is my life now, built with people who choose me. The next day, while cleaning my closet, I find a box of old family photos. I spread them across my bed. In every picture, I can see the sadness I carried, even during happy moments. I keep only a few photos where I'm alone or with friends who treated me well. The rest go into a donation bag. I don't need reminders of a childhood I've spent years unlearning. At my next therapy session, Milena asks what I want my relationship with my family to look like going forward. After thinking, I say I don't want permanent no contact, but I also can't accept their version of reality. We practice future interactions, focusing on calm boundaries. It's harder than I expect, but Milena reminds me that years of conditioning take time to undo. That night, I write a letter I don't plan to send. I write everything I wish I could say about the harm their blame caused. When I finish, I feel a release I didn't know I needed. A month later, Curtis emails to say his surgery went well. He thanks me for offering help. It's brief, but meaningful. I respond kindly and leave the door open. A separate relationship with him feels possible. The following week, Yoim assigns me to lead a major library project. He tells me I earned it. For once, I believe him. I focus on the work, ignoring the old voice that says success won't last. The project goes well. The client is happy. Cillian suggests celebrating, and I agree, feeling proud of the life I've built.
I spend 20 minutes standing in front of my closet trying to decide what to wear to a celebration dinner for my own success. It feels a little ridiculous, but also surprisingly nice. We meet at the restaurant on Friday night, and there's a brief moment when I walk in and see everyone already seated, clearly waiting for me. Alyssa waves me over, and Cillian pulls out my chair as if it's a formal occasion. Yoam has already ordered appetizers and keeps talking about how impressed the client was with my presentation. I sit there listening to people I work with every day say genuinely kind things about my work. That's when it hits me. This is what normal feels like. No one is waiting for me to fail. No one is joking about how long my luck will last. These people actually enjoy having me around and believe I'm good at what I do. Alyssa raises a glass and says she knew I'd be leading projects within a year of her mentoring me. Everyone joins the toast, and I have to blink back tears because I've never been celebrated like this before. My parents threw my brother a huge party for getting into college, but told me not to make a big deal out of my scholarship. This dinner with coworkers means more to me than any family gathering ever did. The next week, my phone reminds me that it's my mother's birthday. I stare at the notification for a full minute before swiping it away. Every year since I left home, I've called her, even when she barely acknowledged my birthday. This year, I don't call. I feel guilty for about an hour, that familiar knot telling me I'm being a bad daughter. Then I remember she didn't call me on my last birthday, breaking her usual routine of checking in to see if I'd failed yet. The guilt fades quickly. I spend the rest of the day focused on project plans and don't think about her again until Cillian asks that evening whether I've talked to my family. I say no. He nods, squeezes my hand, and doesn't ask for more details. My next session with Melina is 2 weeks later instead of our usual weekly appointment. She suggested spacing them out since I'd been doing better, and I agreed, even though part of me still wants that regular reassurance. We spend the first few minutes talking about work, the dinner, and my mother's birthday. Then Melina says something that catches me off guard. She tells me I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm actually doing well and building a life based on my own values instead of reacting to rejection. I sit with that because she's right. The condo, my job, my relationship with Cillian, my friendships with Alyssa and my coworkers, none of it happened because I was running away. It happened because I chose it. I built it intentionally. She asks how that feels, and I say it feels unfamiliar but good, and sometimes scary, because a voice in my head still expects it all to fall apart. She reminds me that voice belongs to my mother, not me, and I get to decide whether to listen. 3 weeks later, I get a text from an unknown number. I almost delete it, assuming it's spam, but something makes me open it. It's Curtis, asking if we can meet for coffee while he's in my city for a follow-up appointment. My first reaction is a spike of anxiety that surprises me. I thought I was past caring what he thought. I stare at the message for 10 minutes, wondering what he wants. Part of me wants to ignore it, but another part is curious. I reply that we can meet at a coffee shop near the hospital, somewhere public. He sends a thumbs-up emoji and a time. Curtis looks healthier than I've seen him in years. He's gained weight and no longer looks exhausted. We order coffee and sit in a corner, and the first 10 minutes are awkward. We exchange basic updates, avoiding anything meaningful. Then he sets his cup down and looks at me directly. He tells me he's had time to think during recovery about our family and how things were when we were kids. He says he's starting to see it differently now that he's been away from the house. I let him talk. He describes how our parents panicked during his surgery, how they blamed everyone but themselves for not having money saved. Watching that made him realize things he'd avoided before. He admits he benefited from being the golden child while I took the blame, and that he went along with it because it was easier. He says seeing them struggle made him understand they weren't good at taking care of anyone, including themselves. They just needed someone to blame. Hearing him acknowledge this matters more than I expected. I don't need a full apology. Recognition is enough. We talk for nearly 2 hours. He asks about my life now and actually listens. Before we leave, we agree to stay in touch and see what kind of relationship we can build going forward. He mentions he's finally looking for a real job and that our parents are upset about him wanting independence. Listening to him, I realized they always needed someone to control. When I left, that role shifted. Curtis is starting to see it and wants out. Afterward, I sit in my car for a few minutes before driving home. Then I call Melina, even though it's not a session day. I tell her about the meeting. I'm surprised by how much lighter I feel. Having even one family member acknowledge part of the dysfunction makes me feel less alone. She says that kind of validation can be powerful. When she asks how I feel about staying in touch with him, I say cautiously hopeful. That night, Celian asks if I think my parents will ever change. I think about it carefully before answering. I tell him I've stopped needing them to change. Whether they do or don't no longer determines my peace. I built a good life, and if they want to be part of it, they'll have to meet me where I am. He nods and pulls me closer. The holidays arrive faster than I expect. Instead of dreading them, I decide to host Thanksgiving with people who actually want to be there. We plan, cook, and fill our small dining space with warmth and laughter. During dessert, Alyssa asks how I'm really doing. I tell her I'm sad about what I didn't have, but I'm not willing to sacrifice myself anymore. She raises a glass and calls it healthy. Everyone joins in. Later, my phone buzzes. It's Curtis, wishing me a good day. Simple and sincere. I save the message and put my phone away. Work picks up after Thanksgiving, and the project comes together better than I imagined. When the community center opens, a local architecture magazine features it. Yoam frames the article and hangs it in my office. He tells me to let myself feel proud without waiting for something to go wrong. I try. Before Christmas, Melina asks if I'm ready to move to monthly sessions. I realized I handled the family situation without losing myself. I tell her yes. Walking out, I feel proud in a quieter, deeper way. One evening, Celian asks about our future. I check for panic, but it doesn't come. I tell him honestly that I'm not scared anymore. He asks me to marry me, and I say yes before he finishes. We laugh and cry, and it feels real and steady. We share the news with friends. Curtis texts congratulations and asks to meet Celian someday. I say yes without hesitation. Planning the wedding feels light and joyful. I realize this is the family I needed all along, the one I chose and built myself.